Hi, everyone, and welcome to an episode of the Galit Speaks podcast. I have an awesome guest today. Daniel John Carey is the author of 2 books about life redesign and rehabilitation, one titled Dream Another Dream and the other titled Dream Your World. He is also the author of a book about screenwriting used in film schools. He runs a screenplay writing workshop in Los Angeles, helping a wide variety of writers polish their TV and film scripts. The Dream books evolved out of his collection of philosophical and life theory quotations that he started gathering as a teenager as a way to seek the wisdom and advice of people throughout history. He is the product of a dysfunctional household of many misfortunes. As a young adult, he found himself completely unprepared for life and homeless. After suffering a series of health problems, including kidney failure and back injury, he built his life into what it is today. Part of it was building financial security by investing in index funds. Another part was through plant-based nutrition and exercise. He spent years working as a ghost co-author, helping doctors and nutritionists write books about health. He wrote a book titled Plant-Based Regenerative Nutrition, which was published in 2023. He shares his stories and books with the aim of helping others who had or are experiencing a troubled life. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here. I've been listening to your podcast. I really like your podcast.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really want to hear more about your story. So I know you went through a rough childhood, and I'm sure that's, been the catalyst to get you to where you are today. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
My childhood was, I grew up in Ohio, and both of my parents were only children, and my father was a first-generation American. His father came over from Ireland after a big drunken fight with his father. So there was an alcohol problem going on centuries before I was born. But and then my mother's family is from Scotland, and so she also had no brothers or sisters. And then the way she was conceived was kind of odd, because the person who was her father's wife was her aunt. So her father got his sister-in-law pregnant, and the baby was my mother, and she was raised by her father and his wife.
Okay.
But apparently that she called her mom, and her mother also had a couple other children from a couple other guys. So I guess she liked to have, who knows? She liked to party and she liked to dance, and that's all about I know about her. At one point, my grandmother was working for a wealthy family, and she had a baby by that man also. And so who knows what was going on with her, but apparently she was a lot of fun, and she liked to dance and turn up the music and that kind of thing and move the furniture aside and hey, but she apparently never got married. And then my father's father married this Irish girl here in Pennsylvania. And I mean, I live in California, but in America and in Pennsylvania. And then a couple weeks after, I don't know if it was 2 days or 2 weeks, but after my father was born, his mother died of an infection, because back then they didn't have good treatment for that type of thing. And so he didn't know that the woman who raised him wasn't his mother until he was going into the Korean War, and he saw his birth certificate, and then he saw so that must have been kind of, sad, and to find out what happened to his real mother, that she died after childbirth. But his father, my father's father, was a severe alcoholic, unfortunately. And when my father was a teenager, his father was in a bar fight and ended up with a brain injury and spent the rest of his life in a mental institution. And that, I guess, was pretty dark in the 40s and 50s. So all my grandparents died before I was born. I never met any of them. So my parents, though, had 8 children, and I'm one of the youngest. I have 5, or had 5 older brothers and 2 younger sisters. And so it was that era of the Kennedy years where big Irish Catholic families were the thing to do. And apparently, I mean, my first 4 years, I remember there was kind of nice. We weren't rich or anything, but we were in a better part of town, not a rich part of town at all. And my father was in insurance and real estate, getting into real estate sales, and he was an insurance man. And my mother had her own money because she sang for weddings and funerals. She got paid. So some of my earliest years were memories were going to her rehearsals of, sitting and inside the Catholic church, and someone playing the organ and her singing, getting ready to perform at a wedding or a funeral or whatever. But then, so by the time I was 4, they had their 8 children. And yeah. So that's a setup. And then when I was 4, after my second sister was born, my father was in a car accident driving drunk, and he went through the windshield and he hit his head on the telephone pole, and it cracked his skull open, and he actually lost part of his brain. So after that, he was less intelligent. It was much harder for him. Before that, he was like the fun guy who all the neighbors would talk to, all that type of thing, and tell jokes and laugh and hang out in the neighborhood, drinking a beer with the, guy down the street or whatever. And he was very social. But after that, he was very frustrated and angry and unhappy and not the same person at all. When he got home from the hospital, he used to always pick me up, but I was told before he came home not to get near him because he wasn't allowed to pick me up. He had a big bandage on his head, and I didn't know really the whole situation, but so I wasn't allowed to get near him. And when I saw him, when he got home from the hospital, he looked at me and he didn't even seem to know not only who I was, but what I was. Like, he was just a little bit perplexed by everything.
Yeah.
So that was sad. And then that's part of the setup of what happened to my family. And a few months later, our house started on fire in the middle of the night. And so my mother injured her head. She fell down the stairs and she injured her head, and she ended up in the hospital for weeks. And she came home, and it changed her personality. And she also could never sing anymore. She injured her vocal cord in her lung, and one of her lungs, at least one. And so that took her joy away. And they were both only children. We had no aunts or uncles, and it shoved us into poverty. We moved to a different part of town that wasn't as nice. It wasn't horrible, but it wasn't as nice as where we were. And we were kind of unsupervised after that. My 5 older brothers, we went to Catholic school until I was all the way through 4th grade. And then there was some reason my family stopped going to church. I know there was a situation where my brothers broke into the Catholic school and stole the drum set from the music room, and that was part of it. But so we went to public school, and in public school, they definitely did not supervise the children like you get supervised in Catholic school. You have to obey yourself. You line up, you pay attention, you wear your tie, you do and say and go what you're told to do. I don't know if you could hear my neighbor's children right now. Can
No.
you? Oh, okay.
No, but it's live, so whatever happens.
They just came over to near the door on the side. But yeah, so my brothers got kind of out of control. I remember the first when I was 5 years old, a year after the fire, when we had Thanksgiving, my parents invited a bunch of people over who had helped us. Somehow some of them were related to us, but I wasn't even sure how they were related. And then some other people, and they had children. So we had this big Thanksgiving dinner in our house. And that was the only time we ever had a party in that house, ever growing up the whole time. But my brothers were drunk, and one of them was only, let's see, like 9 or 8. He was 8. Or yeah, he just turned 8. So he was already drinking. And my brothers started drinking because it was also free up the street. There were some pubs, and there was endless alcohol in the bottles in the alley at night. So they were teenage alcoholics. And then my 2 younger sisters, one of them had Down syndrome. So she started going to school, getting picked up by a bus and taken away to school every day. And my mother just wasn't very happy, and neither was my father. And there was a lot of yelling and a lot of abuse, physical abuse. My brother, who was a year older than me, got it a lot worse than I did. He was abused badly, and so was I. It was like we were the two who really weren't wanted, and it wasn't hidden. It was talked about even. We were often referred to as the other two, and the household got really dysfunctional because we weren't supervised. My brothers were drinking. I wasn't being paid attention to. I used to hang out with whoever I wanted. I would go and wander around in the woods that were down the street, and there were always hobos beneath the bridge. So I'd sit with these old hobos who were drunk and listen to them talk, and teenagers smoking weed. And that was still the Vietnam era. So there were sometimes teenager or young men who were on their way to Canada, and they were camping in the woods. And sometimes local teenage girls would hook up with these young men. But that's part of the setup. Did you have any questions about that part?
Yeah, so I want to know, first of all, when your brother started to be your like supervisors, how old was the oldest?
They weren't even supervising. They didn't even really pay attention to me because they kind of picked up. I think my oldest is 8 years older than me.
Okay.
And so they didn't, and I actually never had a conversation with him ever in my entire life. But they were doing their own thing, and they kind of picked up on my parents' energy toward me, that I wasn't wanted, and I was like this, other, one of the other two. And I sort of kind of stayed out of their way because they were also violent and really sarcastic, and a couple of them clearly there were some mental health issues going on, and a lot of problems, really low grades. And I also got really bad grades. I was abused physically by my father, and eventually by some other people. By the time I was 8, I had already been fully assaulted and stuff. One of my brothers, who was not quite, I don't know how to say it, he had a lot of issues, but he would tell kids, like, my parents didn't want me and you could do whatever you want to them. And some of them did. Yeah. So they weren't my supervisors. They were actually my nemesis.
Yeah, your abusers.
Yeah.
How did you manage to go from a childhood like that and not end up, abusing alcohol or in jail or on the street, really? Because it seems like a setup for a life of poverty and a life of just an endless cycle of abuse.
I never liked alcohol. I did drink some, but not as much as you would think, but somewhat a lot sometimes on weekends when I was a teenager and stuff like that. And but I saw the way my brothers behaved, and I thought it was kind of gross. Well, it was gross. And I kind of, all the families in the neighborhood did not like my brothers. The teachers at school did not like my brothers. And so I was one of the Carey boys, but there was something different about me. And I would hang out with other kids in the neighborhood whose parents would not let their children associate with my brothers, but somehow I was allowed around them. So I guess that was a little bit of a saving grace. And I saw how other families lived and I saw their issues, but it was nothing compared to ours. And I knew that the families in the neighborhood were curious about my family and afraid also about them. My brothers also got made friends with other troubled kids from surrounding neighborhoods. And the attic in our house was kind of a party zone. My parents' bedroom was on the first floor in the back. It was like this room that was added on before we bought the house. And so the attic was my brother's party, and their friends would go up there and just like drink and smoke weed. And by the time I was 5, in 5th grade, 6th grade, that was going on. And they're really badly behaved kids. And there were a couple of those kids who were abusing me. And one of them was abusing my sister with Down syndrome, but I didn't know how to even I didn't have the words in my vocabulary or who to go to for help. Yeah, so that was a bad situation. And he was one of my brother's best friends, and he would go into the house wherever he wanted. He was almost like treated like he was one of the family, and he knew he could go in and out of the house whenever he wanted. And I caught him a few times doing things to my sister, and I was young and I didn't know what to do. But I think because I saw little windows of how other people lived, and I knew also that I didn't want to be that way. And I heard what other people said about my family, and then they would say, like, how could you even be related to them? Things like that. So yeah,
How did you get out? Did you have people that helped you along the way? Were there teachers or adults or other families that helped you, took you in?
No. That I sometimes would sleep outside, and nobody even asked where I went. There was a time when I was in 6th grade. I stayed away for 2 days and I came back and nobody even seemed to notice that I was gone. And so there were a lot of times growing up where I would just stay out at night, especially in the summer. I would find places to sleep, like someone's backyard couch or something, or sometimes when I was in high school, I would sleep over. There was this couple on the next street who let all the teenagers party at their house, and sometimes I would fall asleep on their sofa or on their porch on their sofa and stuff like that. But I was good at art, and I knew that, so I had that going on. I didn't really know how to read. When I was in 7th grade, this is a thing that happened was, or in 8th grade, I got a newspaper route. One of my older brothers, a couple of my other brothers had it, and then for some reason it was given to me. My brother, who was a year older than me, I don't know what happened, but he barely spoke at all. He was so abused so badly. And so he didn't take the paper route, and I was given it. I was basically told, like, you're waking up at 5 a.m. by my mother, who rarely talked to me, and you're going to go with your brother and learn how to do the paper route. I'm like, okay. And so I did that, and I took the paper route over. So in 8th grade, I had this paper route, and I had a little transistor radio, and I would listen to that while I was delivering newspapers. I would have to wake up early, way before sunrise, go deliver newspapers, come home, take a shower, and go to school. But I started understanding the news stories were the same news stories in the newspaper. So I started reading the newspaper, and I was able to start retaining what I read, and that's how I learned how to read.
Wow.
But at the end of 8th grade, there was a middle-aged man. I don't know how dark you want me, because this is dark, what I'm going to say. Okay, this is
real.
Yeah, this is what happens when you're an unsupervised child. You have no idea how to deal with life. You're just kind of trying to get through things. But my grades were improving because suddenly I knew how to read. And I actually was kind of liking life for the first time, because I I had my newspaper. I would go to school. My grades were improving. I started reading books for the first time. The first book I read was Old Yeller, and that was like this late winter or early spring of 8th grade. And I thought, I was always called names, like how stupid I was and how dumb I was by my parents and my brothers. And so when I read a book, I thought, if I told my mother, like, they'd realize I'm not some stupid, I read a book. And so I told her, and she kind of like laughed and said, which book? And I said, Old Yeller. And she just scoffed and said, that's for children. And so the second book I read was Helter Skelter, about the Manson murders.
Yeah.
I went from that, and a teacher in school, the teachers really didn't, I think that partly they were afraid of me, and they knew my family because my 5 older brothers had already been through their classes. But this one teacher tried to take the book away from me when she saw me with Helter Skelter, and I kind of wrestled with her to keep my book. You're not taking my book. And that was freaky. But so the newspaper route, there was this one day I would go collecting money, knocking on doors and asking for the money that the people owed me, my customers. And I remember I was staying in this hallway of this apartment building where I delivered newspapers, thinking that I felt good and I was tall and like, this isn't so bad. And it was springtime and things were good. So, for the first time I felt okay. And right then I heard voices behind me in the apartment in the other side of the hallway. The door was open, and I knew that apartment was the apartment they rented out in the apartment complex for parties. And there was a sign on the door that said, if you want to rent the room for the residents of the apartment complex, they could rent it. There was like a pool table, and had access to the pool in the courtyard, big courtyard. And it wasn't a fancy building, but it was just like, they did have a pool. And these 3 college-age kids were leaving, and they were saying something to this guy who was the manager of the apartment building, who I didn't know. He had recently taken over the manager position of the apartment building after this young couple who had managed the building, who were really nice, moved away. So yeah, those 3 college kids walked away, and I was knocking on the door across the hallway, but the doorway of the party room was open, and I kind of leaned in and looked partway into it, and the man who was the building manager saw me and said, come on, you want to see the room? Come on in, look at this. And I was like, no, I'm gotta collect. And he said, no, come on, let me show you something. You should see this over here. And there was really nothing in the room except for a pool table and some benches near this kind of bar thing. And he pointed to the side of the bar. How much detail should I go into? On the other side of the pool table, he was standing over there, and he said, you should see this down here. And I'm like, so I went over to the side of the pool table, and there was nothing there. And he's like, no, it's underneath. You got to get, yeah. And so I looked, and then all of a sudden he had grabbed my hair, and I was on my knees. And so that happened. He tried to get, and my face was banging against because I was trying to get away from his, and my face is banging against the pool table right here, and that hurt so bad. And I'm trying to, and he wouldn't let go of my hair. And other things happened, and then he decided, I guess he was enough. I wasn't like, there was no entrance, but it was a violent molestation on the pool table. And he finally stopped, and he kind of laughed. I didn't even understand. I was in 8th grade. I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't understand what got on me, what got on my face. I didn't know anything about that stuff. No one ever talked to me about it. I didn't have any experience with that. I didn't know what happened. It was as if I got kidnapped by a space alien, and they did stuff to me that I didn't understand. So I was pulling up my pants, and my change from collecting on the route had fallen all over the floor. And the whole time I had held on to my collection book. For some reason, I just wouldn't let my collection, I had to keep my collection book. But I tried to pull my pants, but my underwear was torn, and I just was like, I just pulled my pants up, and I was trying to collect my money off the floor, and he's like, that's enough. And he opened the door. He's like, you need to leave. And I was afraid to go near him. So I ran the other way to the windows because I thought I could go out to the pool, but I got tangled in the trying to open up the curtains or whatever they were, the blinds. And he grabbed a hold of me and dragged me across the room and shoved me out into the hallway. And I always thought he was chasing after me, and I ran. And instead of going out to the main street, I went back to the back of the building, the parking lot back there, and I hid behind some cars. And I thought he was following me. I don't know, and then after a while, there was nobody around. So I went out and I went to the main road, but I didn't go to my typical route home. I took this side road up this bridge, or before this bridge, I went to the railroad tracks, followed the railroad tracks to the field, the woods at the end of the street where I lived. And I was there was a meadow, and I got into the meadow, and I just like collapsed onto my knees and hands. And I was just like looking at the grass and the little bugs in the grass, and just watching the bugs and the ants and things in the field in this meadow. And I heard some voices, and there were these teenagers, and I recognized a couple of the voices from local teenagers who I didn't really know, but I knew who they were. And they were walking on this path along the hill that goes down to the railroad tracks. And they stopped, and they're like, what's wrong with him? What is he doing? And a teenage boy, one of the girls was like, "Yo, just leave him alone." And the teenage boy came up near me, and he said, "Are you on something?" And I didn't know what he meant. I thought he meant like, am I kneeling on cardboard or plywood? That was what entered my mind. And I didn't even look up really. I kind of glanced sideways, but they're like, "Oh, come on." And they left and walked away. And then I got up and went to the main field, and there were people playing baseball. And I didn't want anybody to see me, and I just laid down on the grass in the far part of the park and waited until the baseball team way on the other side of the park left. And it was getting dark. And then I hopped fences to get to my backyard, and then went down the basement. But there was a thing I left out. When I left his place and I was walking on that big street toward the bridge, some lady in a car drove by, and she screamed at me, like laughed and said something. I didn't know what she was talking about. I realized my torn underwear was hanging out of the back of my pants, and I was so embarrassed. But the next morning I had to wake up and go deliver newspapers.
And to that same building?
Yeah. And I got up, went my usual route, and I was freaked out and didn't tell anybody. No one talked to me. My parents never asked anything about me. I just did my own. I was basically like living a separate life, running my little business as a newspaper courier, going to school and doing my homework and sleeping and eating. But so I went, and when I delivered his newspaper, I wrinkled it all up and put it on his doorstep, tore it and wrinkled it and put it on his doorstep. And then I went back and I peed all over it. And then when I went collecting on Wednesday evenings and then Saturday afternoons, I avoided his building. I was afraid of him. And he started showing up places. Like, he would be in one of the apartment buildings, and I would go in, and he would just be standing there with this kind of sneer, and I'd back out. So I wouldn't go and collect in that building. And it became like this cat and mouse thing. And then one day I told a kid at school, I hardly had any friends, but I told this boy that there was this man who was bothering me on my paper route. And he was like, "Oh yeah, some of the people want your money." And he just had the wrong impression, and I didn't know how to explain what happened. And he said, "Well, you should talk to this other kid, because he has a newspaper route too, and he's tough, and he'll go and collect for you." And so we told this other kid, and so he came, and we met on our bikes, and he went into that building to collect. And then we saw the man. I was waiting far away with this other boy, and we saw the man come out, and he stole my friend's bike, and he brought it inside the building. My friend came out of the building. He was looking for his bike, and he came over to us, and he's like, "My bike's gone." We didn't know what to do. So I kept delivering newspapers and collecting, but it got really bad, and I was way behind. And the guy who came every Thursday, I think, to take the money from I kept it in this metal box. He was actually allowed to go in our house, go to the living room, the dining room, and open this cabinet to get the weekly money that paid for the newspapers that I got from the Cleveland Plain and Dealer newspaper. And so he was like, "Where's you're short again?" And a few weeks of that went on, and then eventually I just abandoned the route, and I started drinking and on weekends and started smoking weed, and I completely changed into this messed up kid, and nobody seemed to notice. Yeah.
You were traumatized.
Mm-hmm.
As an adult, what did you do? I mean, you're sharing the story now, and it, what did you do to allow yourself to be able to do that now in adulthood?
I went to therapy eventually, and when I was in my 40s, I went, and then in my 30s I went, and then I started going again later, and then I went again to this other psychologist. The first two weren't very helpful, and then I went to a Jungian trained psychologist, and she was way more helpful. And it was the first time I really could tell the story. I had it like written down. I started keeping a journal as a teenager, but I kind of wrote it in a way that only I would understand it. So that's how I got into writing, really, was keeping a journal. And I started collecting quotations when I was a teenager too, for some reason. But I told the psychologist that I was thinking about writing a story about what happened to me, because I had contacted the News Weekly in Cleveland, Ohio, and asked them if they'd be interested in a story like this that happened there, and they said they would. So I wrote it, and it was in the News Weekly in Cleveland, and I used a fake name to protect my privacy, and I told the story about what happened to me as a newspaper boy. And then that was seen by a psychologist in Canada who deals with child abuse issues, and then they connected me. They got hold of the psychologist in Connecticut, who was an editor of a psychology journal, and then they asked if I could write the story a little bit clearer and more details for the psychology journal that was in Australia. So I did that, and that felt really good to tell the story. And then I read some of the responses that the article got in the News Weekly in Cleveland, and that felt good. And so I felt comfortable finally sharing the story. And I knew that also from the responses that I felt like I was helping people, that some of them mentioned what they had gone through. And that's how I ended up telling more of the story. But I go into some detail about my childhood in my another dream book. And so my book, I use quotations from throughout history, like that are kind of philosophical and life theory quotations, kind of like advice from people from throughout history, mixed with my writing. And I tell some of the story about my childhood in that book, and then my Dream Your World book also. But I wrote those to hopefully help people, and I feel like I have a voice for this kind of thing, and that I understand it, and I could help people, and that's why I'm doing it. But one of the things that happened when I was a teenager, when I was 16, I was so brutally abused by my brothers, and my mother had some extremely serious problems with a lot of issues, and she shouldn't have been really around children. But when I was 16, a few of my brothers beat me up. I don't know why. They came in my bedroom on the last day of school after on Christmas break. I went home and I was so tired. I was taking a nap, and they just came in and beat the hell out of me. So I waited a few days. I had a broken nose and black eyes and stuff, and my back, they injured my back, and I could barely walk. But I waited a few days, and then I woke up early one morning. It was like 17 degrees. And I walked to the freeway, and I stuck out my thumb. I wanted to see the ocean. I thought I was going to die young, and I didn't really care anymore. I'm like, I'm going to go hitchhiking. I felt way safer hitchhiking than I did in my parents' house. And the people were nice to me. I had no problems. They were friendly. I think they thought I was a little bit older than I actually was. I was 16, but I think they thought I was more like 19 or something. And I got to California, I saw the ocean, and the first time I saw it, I didn't know. I saw it from a distance, like half a mile away or a quarter mile away, going down the street in this car that this guy who picked me up hitchhiking was driving me. I told him I wanted to go drop me off at the ocean. And I saw the ocean. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was a wall because it looked like this blue wall. And I'm like, what is that wall? And he's like, what wall? And I was like, that big wall. He's looking around at the buildings we're passing. I was like, no, and then I was like, it kind of in my brain it went, and I realized I was looking at the ocean, and I was like, just blew my mind. But I saw the ocean. I saw people surfing. It was December, late December. That was like December 29th, I think. But I couldn't believe it. But I did go back to Ohio. I wanted to graduate from high school, but I went back to more violence. Within the next few months, my nose was broken 2 more times by a couple of my brothers, and nothing was done. And some of the kids in my art class were like, you need to do something. They can't keep doing this to you. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. What am I going to do? I have a year left of high school. But they're like, you need to go to the counselor. And so I went to this counselor's office, and I had never dealt with any kind of administrators, or I really didn't even like talking to teachers. I kind of stayed quiet and avoided adults because I was freaked out by adults. But I went to the counselor's office, and she was in with some other boy, and I sat there and waited. There were these windows that I could see her office and that she was talking to someone. So that kid got up and left, and she was on the phone, and she kind of went like this, like waved me into her office. So I got up and went in and sat down, and she was talking on the phone to her friend about like which pillow she was going to buy and what color curtains she was going to put on her windows. And it just went on and on and on. I sat there listening to this home decor conversation, and then the bell rang, and she wrote a note and gave me the note and waved me away, and I left, and I went walking, and for hours and hours and hours. It was a freezing cold day, but it felt good on my face because my eye was swollen up. I had black eyes, my nose was broken, and I just walked for probably 6 hours or something. And I finally went home to that house, and the kids, and the next day they asked me, what happened? What did the counselor say? And she didn't say anything.
Yeah. It seems like there were so many times in your story that somebody could have said something, could have stepped in, could have helped you. And each time, nobody stepped up to the plate. They just let the abuse continue and and I think that's, unfortunately, it's a story that gets repeated so often, and especially with administrators.
Yeah, none of the teachers, like if a student shows up and their eyes half shut and their nose is clearly broken, there's some cartilage was actually sticking through the skin of my nose that day, and none of the teachers ever asked me or said anything about it. And then that summer I called the police because I couldn't deal with it. I had a year left of school. I called the police, and they were like, well, there's nothing we could do, because I had heard this thing where you could file a restraining order, and I asked the police on the phone about that, and I said, well, if you live in the same household, there's really nothing you could do about it. And so they weren't helpful. And my father, who never spoke to me, one day I was in the kitchen listening to rock and roll on this little radio in the back room, and he came in, and I thought, oh, he's going to actually talk to me for once. And he was like, so you're going to graduate soon, huh? And I'm like, no, I have a year left. And he's like, well, when you do, I don't really care if I ever see your face or hear your voice or ever hear anything about you ever again. All I said was okay. And he walked out, and that was the whole conversation. And so, yeah, that was interesting. But so I was living in this house. I felt like I was imposing on these people. And but I ended up getting a job at Burger King in my senior year of high school, and worked as much as I could, saved money, and then after graduation, on graduation, nobody showed up on my graduation. I graduated, but none of my family was there. And I was drunk, and some kids were passing around this leather bag with alcohol in it, wine. And then somebody mentioned there was LSD in there. So basically, I was lightly tripping on LSD, and I was drunk on wine when I graduated from high school. And I worked at a factories, and saved money. And then I moved to California. I ended up with really screwed up. I tried to make friends with two of my brothers who were living out here, but they were so messed up. And that turned into a bad situation. And I was surrounded by really bad people. And I thought, I can't live like this. There was a point where I was freaking out because I didn't even really know that much about basic life issues, even about sex education. And there was a point where I was nervous that I had all these different girls pregnant at the same time. And I'm like, what am I doing? I was afraid the phone was going to ring and one of them was going to say this, or maybe more than one. And I was, oh boy. So that's how I ended up. I was like, I need to straighten out my life. And I met these Mormon girls, and I thought, oh, they seem nice. And I ended up getting involved in the Mormon church, and then went on a mission for the Mormon church, which is a whole other thing. And I didn't really know that much about the church when I joined it, and I was learning as I went. Yeah. And I was serving a mission. I didn't really know that much about the church, and I didn't even know about the racism issue. The head of the church back then was Spencer W. Kimball, and I thought he was a black man. One day I mentioned it, that I heard something about the priesthood. Black men couldn't get the priesthood until the 70s, and I was like, I mean, this is way later, but I was like, well, what about Spencer W. Kimball? Didn't he grow up in the church? How does he have the priesthood? And they realized that I thought Spencer W. Kimball was black, and they just was like, he's not black. I was like, oh, I thought he was black. And so that's how I learned about the racism issue. And they denied black men from even being high members of the church until I think 1978 or something like that. And then there was a sexism issue and all sorts of stuff, and the temple ceremony that they put you through, and then you have to wear these underwear for the rest of your life. This has insignias on it, and turns out they're the stitch, these things that are stitched over your left breast and on your belly button and on your knee are actually things from the temple, the Mason's temple ceremony. The guy who started the Mormon church became a Mason, and that's where he got the temple ceremony. And then he told the church members that it was sacred, and that it was like the ancient Christian God's temple ceremony from thousands of years ago. And really all he did was copy the temple ceremony from the Masons and started it as part of the Mormon church. But I didn't know this either. And you go into the temple, and I should have been suspect right away. You need to take off all your clothes in the locker room, and then they give you this poncho thing. And they don't tell you anything about this beforehand, because it's supposed to be sacred, and they don't talk about it outside the temple. So I went through this ritual, and I go into this room with this man, and he's touching me with oil. It's supposed to be blessed oil. He touches your forehead, I think your throat, but your chest, and then your belly button. Then he actually touched my privates. And years later, I found out he wasn't supposed to do that. But I couldn't understand what he was saying, because he was whispering, and I kept what are you saying? I can't understand you. And I found out years later that he also was supposed to talk louder, so I was supposed to understand him. So I still don't understand what he was saying. He was blessing different parts of my body. And then they put you through this, you dress in all these white clothes, and you go through this ritual where you put through these sort of classes where they talk about Satan and Adam and Eve, and that you're supposed to dedicate your life and everything about you, everything you earn, everything, all of your life to dedicated to building the church of God on earth. And I was in deep, and I felt uncomfortable, but I also was everybody I knew by that time was Mormon, and I had gotten my mission call to go to the New England and serve mission as a Mormon missionary in New England, and I ended up doing it. and I felt awkward the whole time, and I didn't feel like it was special or spiritual, but I also was pressured by girls to go on a mission because girls are pressured to marry boys who went on a mission. So the girls in the church pressure the boys to go on missions. And that's how one reason I was pressured into going on a mission, because I wanted to get married and I wanted to have a real family, a nice family, because I had never had that. And I thought I was fixing my life up. And so that's how I ended up getting in the Mormon church. But after my mission, I went to BYU and I didn't like it there. And I got out of there after 1 quarter, came back to California, I ended up homeless, but I had been homeless earlier before I joined the church too. And but I ended up homeless again with pneumonia, living in an RV owned by these people I barely knew. And I had to fix up my life from that. And I started going to college and I started working at a small newspaper. And then I started a small magazine, monthly magazine in LA for parenting, which is so odd, but I was going to school for marketing and advertising and graphic design, and it all fit into like working at this small newspaper. And then I ended up starting my own, and I got an investor, and it took off. It was 35,000 issues every month for free all over, like at toy stores and maternity shops and malls and preschools and stuff. And at first I was delivering the bundles myself, but then eventually there were 7 employees, and I sold out because my business partner, the investor, turned out to be this really crooked guy. So I sold out of that, and then I got involved in other things, and eventually I dropped away from the church because I just kept learning all sorts of stuff about it. The history is all questionable. It's fraud. It's the Book of Mormon, which is they call the other second set of scriptures from ancient America, where it's just this book that Joseph Smith wrote. And I'm glad I got out of that church. So I don't know if that's the story that you thought I was going to tell.
I wasn't sure. That's kind of what I love about this is like, this is the opportunity for you to tell your story and so that people can understand and be inspired and understand that you can go through really horrible things in your life and still end up okay. Right?
Yeah.
I feel like that's my story too, right? I went through some really horrible things and I'm still okay. And it's upon once things happen to you as a child and you can't control that. But once you're an adult, you can take the responsibility on and you can do things to make a change. And going to therapy was something I did and was something you did, and everyone has their journey.
Yeah, I was listening to some of your podcasts and I really like the way you interview people, and I could see how like there's people who have been through horrible situations. But it is true, like my view is if your life is going to change, no one's going to do it for you. You need to do it. You need to wake up. You need to, take care of yourself. You need to educate yourself. You need to take the steps to make your life happen the way you want to. Get in touch with your intellect, your talents, your skills, everything about you. Therapy could really help if you go to the right therapist. Even 12-step programs, or what do you ever have to do? Stay away from drugs, eat healthfully. I wrote this book, Plant-Based Regenerative Nutrition. I ended up, for years, I was helping doctors and nutritionists write books. That's one of the things I did. And I was doing that also while I was doing other jobs, but I was doing that freelance. And I learned so much about nutrition. And I also had kidney failure when I was 29. And so I had to learn about nutrition and learn how to eat cleanly so that it doesn't damage my kidneys or cause me more kidney failure problems. And so, yeah, plant-based nutrition is what I follow, and exercise and yoga and biking and jogging. And I still do all that stuff. When we get off tonight, I'm going to go on like a 3 or 4 or 5 mile jog. But I see that I love what you're doing and that you're helping people, and that like even this, hopefully someone somewhere will hear this and they'll relate to it, and they'll, maybe they'll buy my book, Dream Another Dream, or Dream Your World, or Plant-Based Nutrition or something. And maybe it'll help them get their life together. But what you're doing is awesome, because you never know who's listening either, because it's just completely random podcasts. And maybe somebody will hear this, and maybe I'm hoping that that's why I'm doing this, is to help people and to hopefully inspire and get them to fix up their lives. And, also have some fun, get into their dancing and art and, stuff like that, free from drugs and alcohol. But take a movement class, a dance class, a yoga class, and that's part of, I think, healing and getting rid of, shaking off bad energy, biking and running, and even basketball and baseball and stuff like that. There's team sports you could join, local teams, and even if you play lousy, who cares? Just play anyway. Who cares if you can't dance well? Just dance anyway. If you're bad at yoga and you fall down, who cares? Just keep go to yoga class, get involved with that community. If you can, hire a personal trainer and, get more fit. It's just, we're energy sources, and we need to use that energy in different ways, including through movement and thought and achievement, hopefully also being in healthy relationships with other people who have good energy about them.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you about, because I'm vegan, so why was plant-based important to you?
Wow. When I was 10, there was this family up the street who would go hunting. I didn't know them. They were one of the but there was this man who shot a deer, and I was walking home from school one day, and it was the spring when the sun is starting to hit and the snow's melting, and along the side of the road, the snow melt had undermined the ice. So beneath this ice on the edge of the road, there was this little river, and I was stomping on the ice as I was walking home from school, breaking the ice and splashing in this rainwater, and it started turning pink, and I didn't know why was the water turning pink, and then it got pinker and pinker, and I stopped because it was kind of creepy, and I stopped, and then I saw there was this little stream of blood coming down this driveway, and I looked up the driveway, and in the backyard, hanging from a tree, was a deer with its neck slit open, and the blood was draining from the deer. And so I realized that I didn't want to, I went home, and one of the few times I asked my mother, I didn't really like the woman, and she didn't like me, but I asked her, why is there a deer hanging? And she said, they're going to eat it. And that was powerful, oh, people, that's what meat really is. And I started staying away from meat. Not that I was tilting. I started to tilt toward the vegetarianism, but when I was in my 20s and I found out I had kidney disease, a bunch of the doctors wanted me to have a kidney transplant, and they wanted to put me on dialysis. And then this one doctor said, the other doctors are trying to get you to go on dialysis and get a kidney transplant, aren't they? And I said, yeah. And he said, the only thing I really seen work and be helpful and where you could stay healthy long-term is if you eliminate, in a situation like yours, if you eliminate animal protein from your diet. And so I was 24, and eventually, by the time I was 29, I was having severe kidney problems, and I cut out the rest of the animal protein. And I've been vegan now since then. And so it's been decades, and I've been vegan ever since then. And I stopped. Before that, I was peeing blood, and I was having problems with kidney stones, thousands of them, not just kidney sand and kidney stones, and kidney failure issues and blood clots, and my kidneys getting clogged and infected. But after I went vegan, that stopped. So did my headaches. So did my skin cleared up. I stopped getting colds. I hardly ever get colds. I've had 3 colds in 30 years, and I don't have headaches. But that's how I ended up getting so involved with I was already involved with publishing, and I started helping people. I was a member of this organization that I joined called Publishers Marketing Association, and publishers from all over the world are involved with it. And some of them look for editors or people who know about specific topics. And I started helping people who are writing books about health and nutrition because I was learning so much. And I started hanging out at the UCLA Medical Library, and they thought I was a doctor because I was there all the time researching, because I was helping doctors and nutritionists write their books. And that's how I ended up learning so much that I thought I should put my book together, Plant-Based Regenerative Nutrition. And I'm writing another book that goes along with this book. And so now I learn so much about it because there's also the environmental tie-ins, what's going on with the climate, with cattle and environmental destruction and rainforest destruction, and on and on and on. It's connected to everything that's going on with the environment right now. Is our food is the number one way we interact with Earth. Yeah. How long have you been how did you get into being a vegan?
So it was a long process for me, but I became allergic to dairy, and so that was my first the first animal protein that I eliminated. And what started to happen was I just gravitated towards vegan food and vegan restaurants because I knew I was safe. Because even when you tell other restaurants, sometimes you'll tell them it's an allergy and they'll just think it's a preference, and I'd end up really, really sick. And so after that happened to me over and over, I just started like mostly eating vegan. And then I had watched I care about animals, and I had watched a couple of documentaries, and then I watched the
Earthlings.
No, there was another one where it talked about the health benefits. Game Changer, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I watched that and I was like, wow. I think this is something that I need to like really consider. And then I met the man who's now my husband, and he had been vegan for I think 8 years at that time, and had been vegetarian for even longer. And he just said like, hey, you don't have to do it, and that's cool, but if you want to do it, I can show you how, and like I can introduce you to like the good one, like if we go into the supermarket, I can tell you what's good and what tastes good and what doesn't. And by that time I had just been eating eggs and like finished my last carton of eggs, and now it's been over 3 years now where I haven't touched any animal products, and I feel way better. And it gave me a heart condition, and one of the first things that I went to the doctor and my cardiologist and naturopath, and obviously I chose a naturopath because I knew he was vegan, but he was like, if both of the doctors had said like, if you had been eating animal products, I would have told you the first thing that you needed to do was stop eating animal products. And it's just become a way of life. And now I do more research and, watch more documentaries. And I really consider myself to be more vegan for the animals rather than vegan for health. But I do love like the health benefits that it does give me. And I try, I've worked with a nutritionist and things like that to just try to make it so that I'm eating more whole food, high nutrition rather than the vegan junk food. I still do eat vegan junk food, but it's not the basis of my diet.
Yeah, there's a lot of vegan junk food, and there's a lot of unhealthy vegans who are eating that garbage. And that's one of the reasons I wrote my book, also to educate people that there's a healthier way to do this. I have a garden, and so that year round, because we don't have snow where I live, and so I'm able to do that. But yeah, a lot of people, and I also, because of my kidney issue, I had to learn specifically what is healthy and unhealthy for my kidneys. And it also turns out it's also healthy for your heart and your liver and your skin and your bones and all this other stuff. It's all connected. So yeah, I discourage people from eating all the vegan junk food. Now it's just this marketing thing, like, oh, it's vegan, eat it. And like, no.
Yeah, I have to say, like, I'm a fan of it just because the more people that don't that we learn, the more that we learn that we can eat and function without harming other beings, that's what's important. Like, if you have to do that and eat junk food, that's fine. But also, I like to educate people that being vegan doesn't necessarily mean you're being healthy. Like,
Yeah.
you can, but you can do both, and you can have really good food while doing both.
Yeah. 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 And it does help in all sorts of ways, including the environment and the air and the soil and the water and the fish and the everything from the sharks and the mountain lions. It's all connected together because we're all breathing air. We're all reliant on Earth, and we all need a healthy planet.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So we've gone over an hour. We've just been talking, so you know, but I want to. So I know that your mission is to help people. So I want to let people know how they can get in touch with you. So how would they do that, and what kind of things do you offer?
Why I'm just writing books, and I run my screenwriting workshop for writers in LA. And but I'm on Twitter, and I talk about all sorts of things on there, including writing and other issues and environmentalism. But on Twitter, I'm Daniel John Dijon Carey, because my nickname is Dijon. It's Daniel John Dijon Carey on Twitter. And then on Facebook, I have my screenwriting workshop page called Screenwriting Tribe if you're interested in screenwriting. And then my books are on Amazon: Dream Your World and Dream Another Dream, and Plant-Based Regenerative Nutrition. And I also wrote the Screenwriting Tribe workshop handbook that's used in film schools, some film schools, as a text. And yeah, that's what I do.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for being here, John. I really appreciate how vulnerable you are and how much of your story you shared.
Thank you. I hope it's helpful.
I hope so too. And if anyone is watching this now or watching this on the replay, or you know of somebody that needs to hear this, please make sure to share it with them. You know, if this is on YouTube, like, share, subscribe, do all of the things, because I know that there's somebody out there that needs to hear this.
There is somebody. There's people being abused all over, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'll see you next week. Everyone in the audience, I will see you next week for another episode of the Galit Speaks podcast. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.